My Thomas Story Library, Duck. This is a story about Duck the Great Western Engine. When he came to the station, he soon made it clear that he wouldn't put up with any nonsense. But there was one engine who was more than a match for him. One morning, Percy was talking to Gordon and James in the engine shed. "The Fat Controller's getting a bigger engine to help me," said Percy proudly. "Nonsense," said Gordon. "We don't need a bigger engine." "You just need to work more and chatter less," said James. Percy sighed. "No one listens to me. They think I'm a silly little engine and order me about. I'll show them." But he didn't know how. Later that day, Percy brought some coaches to the station. "Hello, Percy," said the Fat Controller. "You look tired." "Yes, sir," replied Percy sadly. "I don't know if I'm standing on my dome or my wheels." "Cheer up, Percy," laughed the Fat Controller. "The new engine can do the work here alone. You can help Thomas and Toby build my new harbour." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Percy happily. The next morning, the new engine arrived. He was a Great Western engine. "What's your name?" asked the Fat Controller. "Montague, sir, but everyone calls me Duck because they say I waddle," replied the engine. "I don't really, sir, but I like being called Duck." "Duck it is then," said the Fat Controller. "Percy, come and show Duck around." Percy and Duck got on well. Duck knew how to make the trucks behave, and soon they were almost finished. James, Gordon, and Henry watched Duck quietly doing his work. "Let's have some fun," they whispered, and they wheezed. "Quack, quack, quack!" Percy was cross, but Duck ignored them. Then the engines began to order him about. "Do they tell you to do things, Percy?" asked Duck. "Yes, they do," replied Percy sadly. "Right," said Duck. "We'll soon stop that nonsense." And he whispered something to Percy. "We'll do it tonight." That evening, the Fat Controller was just about to go home for tea when he heard a terrible noise. He hurried to the yard. Henry, Gordon, and James were wheezing furiously. "Stop that noise!" bellowed the Fat Controller. "They won't let us in!" hissed Gordon. And the Fat Controller realized that Duck and Percy were sat calmly at the points outside the engine shed, refusing to move. The Fat Controller was very angry. "Duck, explain this behaviour!" he shouted. "Beg your pardon, sir," said Duck politely, "but these engines are giving us orders. Please can you inform them that we only take orders from you?" "Duck and Percy, you are causing a disturbance!" thundered the Fat Controller. "And as for you," he said, turning to the big engines, "you made the disturbance. Duck is quite right. This is my railway and I give the orders." Henry, Gordon, and James were very embarrassed. From then on, Duck worked well at the yard, and the Fat Controller was very pleased with him. One day, Duck was resting in the engine shed when the Fat Controller arrived. "Would you like to have a branch line of your own?" he asked. "Yes, please, sir," Duck replied excitedly. And he took charge of his own branch line, which ran along the coast to the small railway. Duck was very proud of his branch line, but he couldn't do all the work himself, so Donald and Douglas took turns to help him. One evening, he was talking to Donald. "You don't understand how much the Fat Controller relies on me," said Duck proudly. I'm a Great Western and—" "Quick, quick, quick," interrupted Donald. "You sound like you laid an egg. Now let the engine sleep." "Quack yourself," said Duck indignantly. The following morning, Duck spoke to his driver. "Donald says I quack as if I laid an egg," he said. "Let's play a joke on him to teach him a lesson." I have an idea, laughed his fireman, and he whispered something to Duck and his driver. That night, when Donald was asleep, Duck's driver and fireman put something into Donald's water tank. The next morning, when Donald stopped for water, he found an unexpected passenger aboard. A little duckling popped out of his water tank. His driver and fireman could hardly believe their eyes, but Donald smiled. I know who's behind this, he laughed, and Donald told them what had happened in the shed. The duckling was tame. She shared the driver and fireman's sandwiches and rode in the tender. But as the day went on, she grew tired of travelling and hopped off at a station where she stayed. Before they reached home, Donald's driver and his fireman made a plan. That night, they were very busy. And when Duck's crew arrived in the morning, they made a surprise discovery. Look, Duck, they laughed. There's a nest with an egg in it under your bunker. Donald opened a sleepy eye. Well, well, he exclaimed. You must have laid it in the night. Duck laughed. You win, Donald. It would take a clever engine to get the better of you. Duck and Donald became good friends, and the duckling settled at the station. She lived in a pond nearby, but she always flew back to the station to welcome the engines. Donald was her favourite, and she sometimes hopped on for a ride. The station master called her Dilly, but to everyone else, she was always Donald's duck. My Thomas Story Library, Henry. This is a story about Henry the Green Engine. Henry was often ill and couldn't work, but then he tried some special Welsh coal and got the chance to show everyone just what he can do. Henry was a big engine. Sometimes he could pull trains, but sometimes he felt too weak and had to stay in the yard. One morning, Henry was feeling very sorry for himself. I suffer dreadfully and no one cares, he said. Rubbish, Henry, snorted James. You don't work hard enough. The Fat Controller spoke to Henry. You're too expensive, Henry, he said. You have had lots of new parts and a new coat of paint, but they have done you no good. If we can't make you better, we will have to get another engine instead of you. This made Henry, his driver, and his fireman very sad. The Fat Controller was waiting when Henry came to the platform. He had taken off his hat and coat and put on overalls. He climbed onto Henry's footplate. Henry managed to start, but his fireman was not happy. Henry is a bad steamer, he told the Fat Controller. I build up his fire, but it doesn't give enough heat. Henry tried very hard to pull the train, but it was no good. He didn't have enough steam. He gradually came to a stop outside Edward Station. Oh dear, thought Henry. Now I shall be sent away. Oh dear, oh dear. Henry went slowly into a siding, and Edward took charge of the train. What do you think is wrong, fireman? Asked the Fat Controller. It's the coal, sir, he answered. It hasn't been very good lately. The other engines can manage because they have big fireboxes, but Henry's is small and can't make enough heat. With Welsh coal, he'd be a different engine. It's expensive, said the Fat Controller, but Henry must have a fair chance. I'll send James to fetch some. Henry's driver and fireman were very excited when the coal came. Now we'll show them, Henry, old fellow, they said. They carefully oiled Henry's joints and polished his brass until it shone like gold. Henry felt very proud. Then Henry's fireman carefully made his fire. He put large lumps of coal like a wall around the outside of the fire. Then he covered the glowing middle part with smaller lumps. You're spoiling my fire, complained Henry. Wait and see, said the fireman. We'll have a roaring fire just when we need it. The fireman was right. When Henry reached the platform, the water was boiling nicely, and he had to let off steam. Whee! How are you, Henry? Asked the Fat Controller. Peep, 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 whistled Henry. I feel fine. Do you have a good fire, driver? The Fat Controller asked. Never better, sir, and plenty of steam, he replied. Henry was impatient. He wanted to set off. No record breaking, warned the Fat Controller. Don't push him too hard, driver. Henry won't need pushing, sir, the driver replied. I'll have to hold him back. Henry had a lovely day. He had never felt so well in his life. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. Steady, old fellow, he said. There's plenty of time. But still, Henry went quite fast, and they arrived at the station early. Thomas puffed in. Where have you been, lazybones? Asked Henry. But before Thomas could answer, Henry was off again. I can't wait for slow tank engines like you, he said. Goodbye! And off he sped. Gosh, said Thomas to Annie and Clarabel. Have you ever seen anything like it? Annie and Clarabel agreed that they never had. Henry was very happy. With his new Welsh coal, he could work as hard as the other engines. Then one day, Henry had a crash, and the Fat Controller sent him to be mended. Workmen gave Henry a brand new shape and a bigger firebox, so he wouldn't need special coal anymore. Now Henry is so splendid and strong, he sometimes pulls the express. Peep, 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 whistles Henry happily. My Thomas Story Library, Harold. This is a story about Harold the helicopter. He thought helicopters were faster than engines because they have propellers instead of wheels. But then, Percy challenged him to a race. Percy was delivering trucks of stone to the harbour. At the airfield nearby, there was a helicopter buzzing loudly as it waited to land. Loud buzzy thing, said Percy to his driver. I wish it would go and buzz somewhere else. The next day, Percy made a delivery to the airfield. He stopped next to the helicopter. Hello, said Percy. My name's Percy. Who are you? I'm Harold, said the helicopter. With my whirling propeller, I can fly like a bird. Don't you wish you had a propeller too? No, I like having my wheels on the rails, replied Percy grumpily. You engines are much too slow, Harold continued. With my propeller, I can go faster than any of you. Percy was cross, but before he could reply, Harold flew away. Percy puffed angrily to the quarry to pick up his next load of trucks. Hello, Percy, said Toby. You look cross. What's the matter? Percy told Toby what Harold had said about helicopters being faster than engines. I'll show him he's wrong, said Percy firmly. As Percy puffed back to the harbour, he heard a familiar buzzing noise ahead of him. Look, Percy, said his driver. There's Harold. Let's race him. Then he'll see who's fastest. Yes, we'll show him wheels are better than those funny whirling arms, said Percy, and he rushed after Harold. Harold heard Percy speeding up behind him. He realised Percy was racing him to the harbour. You'll never beat me, he said proudly. I will have landed at the airfield before you can stop at the harbour wharf. Don't listen to him, said Percy's driver. We can win this. The race was on. Harold thought a little engine pulling heavy trucks full of stone could never beat him. But suddenly, he saw that Percy was drawing level with him. A few minutes later, Percy's driver shouted, "We're in the lead, Percy!" Percy was having the time of his life, racing along faster than he had ever gone before. "Peep, peep! Goodbye, Harold!" he shouted as he raced ahead. Harold looked down in surprise. He couldn't believe Percy was beating him. Harold charged after him. Percy's fireman was shoveling coal into the furnace as fast as he could. He wiped a cloth around his hot face. "Phew," he said. "This is hard work. I hope we do beat Harold." Then he heard the signal that warned them the harbour wharf was nearby. "Nearly there!" cried Percy's driver. I hope we've done enough to win." Percy braked as he approached the wharf. He rolled under the main line and halted at the buffers, puffing loudly. "Did we win?" he said breathlessly. His fireman scrambled onto the cab roof and looked at the airfield. "We've won!" he gasped. "Harold's still looking for a place to land." Percy smiled. He had shown Harold that engines are just as fast as helicopters. Later, Harold looked embarrassed when Percy made a delivery at the airfield. Percy's driver and fireman sang a song. Said Harold, helicopter to our Percy, you are much too slow. Your railway is out of date and not much use, you know. But Percy with his stone trucks did the trip in record time, and we beat Harold the helicopter on our old branch line. Harold smiled at Percy as he flew over him. "You showed me that you can go even faster than me," he said. "I guess wheels are as good as a propeller after all." Percy smiled happily. What fun it had been racing against Harold. He couldn't wait to get back to the engine shed and tell the others all about it. My Thomas Story Library, Peter Sam. This is a story about Peter Sam, a narrow-gauge engine. He first worked at the old railway for the Thing Controller many years ago. Everyone made fun of his new funnel, but he soon had the last laugh. It was winter on the island of Sodor. Peter Sam was puffing slowly along the track. He was worried about his funnel. It had not felt right since he had had an accident with some trucks, and now it felt like the wind was trying to blow it off. "My funnel feels all wobbly," he said to his driver. "I wish my new one would hurry up and arrive. The Thing Controller said it will be something special." "You and your special funnel," laughed Rusty, Sir Handel and Duncan. They all liked Peter Sam, but his special funnel had become a bit of a joke. The winter wind grew stronger, and rain lashed down on the engines. The heavy rain turned the hillside streams into raging rivers which threatened to wash away the tracks. Rusty worked hard carrying workmen up and down the line to clear the branches and leaves so the water could flow away from the tracks. The next day, Rusty's driver brought bad news. "There's been a washout near the tunnel," he said. "The track bed has been swept away. We need to repair it immediately." The repair work took much longer than expected. As the days went by, the weather became much colder and frosty. Finally, the repairs were finished so the tunnel could be used again. The next morning, Peter Sam carefully went over the mended track and slowly rolled into the dark tunnel. His driver shouted, "There's something hanging from the roof!" There was a loud clanging noise, and Peter Sam suddenly felt rather strange. As he came out of the tunnel, his driver saw that he had lost his funnel. Peter Sam's guard went back into the tunnel to find his funnel. He came out holding the funnel and a large icicle. "This is what hit you," he said. "We can't mend your funnel here, We'll have to finish the journey without it and get it repaired at the station. Peter Sam set off again, but without his funnel, smoke billowed over the carriages and the passengers complained. At the side of the track, his driver noticed an old drain pipe. He wired it to Peter Sam to work as a funnel for the rest of the journey. Peter Sam was embarrassed. "I hope none of the other engines see me looking like this," he said sadly. But as Peter Sam approached the station, Rusty and Sir Handel saw his drainpipe funnel. They burst into laughter and sang a song. "Peter Sam said again and again, his new funnel will put ours to shame, but he went into a tunnel and lost his old funnel, now his famous special funnel's a drain." Luckily for Peter Sam, his new funnel had arrived that day. He couldn't wait to see it, but when his driver opened the parcel, he thought there had been a mistake. "Oh no! Has somebody squashed my new funnel?" asked Peter Sam. The thing controller laughed. "Don't worry," he said. "It's a special funnel called a Giesel. It is the most up-to-date funnel there is." "How does it work?" asked Peter Sam. When you puff, you draw air through your fire to make it burn brightly. Your old funnel made puffing hard work, but your new Giesel funnel has special pipes to help the air come easily. You'll now have more strength to do your work." Peter Sam wasn't sure that he was going to like having the strange new funnel. At first, the other engines thought Peter Sam's new funnel was a great joke. "Did you sit on it?" asked Duncan, and hooted with laughter. "It's certainly special," giggled Sir Handel. Peter Sam had wished he had his old funnel back, but he soon realized that the thing controller had been right. His new funnel did make work much easier. Now the other engines would have nothing to laugh about. Peter Sam became very proud of his new funnel. It helped him glide along the tracks, easily pulling long lines of trucks behind him. Sir Handel, Duncan, and Rusty soon stopped laughing at his new funnel. They watched in amazement as he sped past them, pulling more trucks than he had ever been able to before. The other engines wished they also had a special funnel, just like Peter Sam. My Thomas Story Library, Emily. This is a story about Emily the single Stirling engine. When she came to the railway, some of the engines were very unfriendly, but they soon learnt that things are not always what they first appear to be. A new engine was arriving on the island of Sodor. Thomas puffed happily into Knapford Station. At the platform, there was a beautiful engine with shiny paintwork and gleaming brass fittings. "Thomas, meet Emily," said the Fat Controller. "Hello," wheezed Thomas. "Hello," puffed Emily. "Emily, go and collect the coaches so you can learn the passenger routes," said the Fat Controller. "Yes, sir," smiled Emily, and she steamed away. The only coaches Emily could find were Annie and Clarabelle. Her driver hooked them up, and Emily puffed slowly and carefully along the track. Annie and Clarabelle grumbled all the way. "There'll be trouble when Thomas finds out," whispered Clarabelle. But Emily couldn't understand why the coaches were so cross. She passed Edward and Percy and whistled a friendly hello, but the engines just stared angrily at her. Emily was pleased to see Thomas puffing down the line. "Hello, Thomas," she called cheerfully. But Thomas glared at Emily when he saw she was pulling Annie and Clarabelle. "Those are my coaches," he muttered crossly. Now Thomas was being rude, and Emily had no idea why. She chuffed away, feeling very sad. Thomas was at Maithwaite Station when the Fat Controller arrived. "I want you to go to the docks to pick up some new coaches," he ordered. "New coaches?" exclaimed Thomas. "But sir—" "Really useful engines don't argue!" shouted the Fat Controller. Thomas was very unhappy. He thought the new coaches were for him, and he wanted Annie and Clarabelle back. Later that day, Emily returned to the yard. Oliver was very surprised to see her pulling Annie and Clarabelle. "Those are Thomas's coaches!" he cried. "No wonder he was cross," said Emily. "I will return them straight away." Meanwhile, Thomas was puffing angrily along the track with the new coaches. "Don't want new coaches," he chuffed. Emily was on her way back when a signalman waved her down. Oliver hadn't cleared his box. Emily sped off to see what was wrong. Oliver had broken down on the track crossing, and his driver had gone for help. Suddenly, Emily heard a whistle in the distance. Thomas was steaming along the track, straight into Oliver. He would never be able to stop in time. Emily quickly charged toward Oliver and pushed him off the track just before Thomas rocketed past. Emily had saved Thomas and Oliver. That evening, the Fat Controller had a special surprise for her. "Emily, you were a very brave engine," he said, so it gives me great pleasure to present you with 2 brand new coaches." "Thank you, sir," replied Emily. "Thomas, I'm sorry I took Annie and Clarabelle." "And I'm sorry I was so cross," said Thomas. Emily was very happy. She had 2 beautiful new coaches and a new friend. Later that summer, the Fat Controller opened some new routes. Emily was given the flour mill special. "I have to do the Black Lock run," huffed James. "He's frightened of the Black Lock monster," teased Thomas. "Nonsense," said James, and he puffed away. "What's the Black Lock monster?" asked Emily. "Nobody knows," said Thomas. "Black shapes move in the water, then disappear." Emily was glad she didn't have to go to Black Lock. The next morning, Emily collected the trucks from the flour mill, but they were being naughty. Emily pulled as hard as she could, but the trucks made her go very slowly. Emily was late delivering the flour, so there was no fresh bread that day. The Fat Controller was cross. "I didn't have any toast for breakfast. If you are late again, you will have to do the Black Lock run instead of James." "I must get the flour to the bakery on time tomorrow," puffed Emily. But the next day, the trucks were being naughty again. They told Emily to leave before they were coupled properly, so half of them were left behind. The bakery manager was very angry when Emily arrived with only half the flour. Emily raced back to the mill for the rest of the trucks. She was very cross and shunted them with all her strength. But the trucks had taken their brakes off. They rolled backward and splashed into the duck pond. Emily was covered in a gluey, floury mess. That evening, the Fat Controller came to see her. "Emily, you are going to take over the Black Lock run," he shouted. "It might be nice," said Thomas reassuringly. But Emily wasn't so sure. The next morning, she puffed sadly to the station. There were lots of excited children and holiday makers waiting for her. "I mustn't let them down," she thought. And soon, Emily was steaming up hills and through valleys. Finally, Emily reached the murky waters of Black Lock. Suddenly, she saw something move in the water. Her boiler quivered and her valves rattled. Then the water settled, and Emily saw what the monster really was. "It's a family of seals!" she cried delightedly. That evening, Emily took Thomas to watch the seals. Blacklock is a nice route after all, said Emily. Well, things aren't always what they seem, said Thomas carefully, and both engines smiled.